Alright, when you sit down to play a game, generally you'll have some expectations about what you'll get out of it. If you're playing a shooter, you'll most likely be looking for something high-paced and action-focused. If you're playing a multiplayer game, you're probably someone that's there for cooperative content, and if you're playing a story-driven game, it's reasonable to assume that you're playing it for the experience offered through that story. With gachas though, being that they're pretty much all live service games, I'd say most are there for the long term. The build-up over time is where the value of these games come from, whether that's through the slow progression of character upgrades, the long burn of the story that these games usually have, the feeling of finally being able to clear content after a while of working to do it, or whatever else. These games are ones that you never really complete in the same way that you can finish a story game or meet a goal you set in a multiplayer game, or maybe even a rank you could achieve in some competitive shooter. Instead, they offer a variety of reasons to log in and keep players engaged. But what happens when you have a gacha game that is less of a gacha and more of just a game? Well, for me, that was Arknights, and it was truly a different kind of experience. So what is Arknights? Arknights is a tower defense gacha released by Hypergriffin 2020 that definitely has the bones of a more traditional gacha game, right? Like you have stamina systems, you've got 6 different rarities of characters you have to roll for, you have XP systems and skills you need to farm materials for. There's ascensions that unlock different aspects of characters like passives and other stuff like that, and a whole bunch of other things that are normal to see in these types of games. Where Arknights sets itself apart from the rest of the gacha landscape is what else it offers beyond those things. If you want a unique and future tech art style that you can't find in many other places, it's got that. If you want characters that are both full of variety in terms of design plus well written, there's a ton of those. Do you want an actually well thought out and very in-depth story? Well, there's 14 chapters of it, and the first arc, which consists of 9 chapters, equates to the length of the first 4 books in the Chronicles of Narnia series. Maybe you want difficult content. Not only is there hard mode versions of all the story stages, but there's also both easy and hard event stages, and on top of that, there's endgame modes that have difficulty modifiers that you as the player get to choose to customize your experience. Do you want more permanent and more importantly, infinitely replayable content? Well, boy, do they have you covered with an entire roguelike mode that's gotten 5 full version updates that entirely change how it plays each time the updates happen. And you can still play the old versions and get their rewards too. And that's not even mentioning that you can still play all the old events that you may have missed out on as even more permanent content. There's tons of different things available to do for a wide variety of players, so as long as you don't mind the gameplay as well as the chibi art style that's used in the actual combat, there will be something for everyone. The biggest thing that sets Arknights apart from all the current mainstream 3D gachas is that it's a tower defense game, you know, kinda like the old Bloons games I'm sure we all played ages ago. You're given a grid-based map with specific tiles that you can place your units on, some of which can only go on the road tiles that enemies move on, and some of which are placed surrounding those road tiles. This means that for the most part, it plays like a strategy game. There are some broken units that you can use to circumvent the need for strategy in some stages, but the great thing about the game is that good strategy will pretty much always allow you to clear a stage, even when you don't necessarily have the most optimal units for it. You get to place your units through a system called deployment points, or DP for short. Usually it recharges over time, but by the time you have enough to get your team placed, the enemies would have already gotten into your base. So there's certain units you can place that have skills to generate it quicker called vanguards, but that's not all. In terms of other units, there's a wide variety that you have at your disposal. There's 8 main types: caster, guard, medic, sniper, specialist, supporter, defender, and vanguard like I mentioned just a bit ago. Each of those main types have anywhere from 5 to 11 subclasses that allow them to do different things depending on what subclass the unit has. Those main types are all pretty simple. For example, defenders are generally going to be your tanks, medics will be your healers, casters are your mages, vanguards generate DP and stuff like that. On the other hand, the subclasses are where things get a bit crazy. Like I said, a defender is generally considered a tank, right? And that means they're usually there to absorb damage and take aggro and block enemies. Well, Arknights said, what if they were actual tanks like you'd see IRL, and made a defender subclass called Fortress, where instead of just absorbing damage, they shoot back. And man, do they shoot back a lot. That's just one example, but it definitely plays a pretty huge part into opening up doors for each player to have a different experience whenever they play the game. My defender units could be the more traditional type of tanks, yours could be the fortress ones, and another person could have one that acts as a pseudo-medic. There's a ton of variety, and all of this adds more depth to the game. On top of that, there's a ton of rarities available, which might make you think that there's some units that are kinda just trash, but even the lower rarity units are still able to clear most of the content, not to mention that some of them are genuinely very good, and others are sometimes the best best option to use depending on the enemies you're fighting and the game mode that you're playing. A good chunk of the units also have more than just one skill at their disposal. The 1 to 2 stars don't have any, but they all have unique passives. The 3 stars have 1 skill, the 4 and 5 stars have 2, and the 6 stars have 3. Having a wider range of options to choose from definitely plays into the strategy aspect of the game. Like, one skill may be better on map 1, whereas another skill may be better on map 2. This all leads to a ton of diversity across the game. But it's not just the types of units that offer that diversity, because the game pretty much lets you choose your own way to play, and on top of that, if the characters aren't that amazing, they can eventually get buffs to become better later. I will say that there definitely are some characters that aren't amazing. I mean, that's bound to happen when you have over 300 units. That said, for the most part, you can still use those not amazing characters whenever you want, assuming you're willing to put in the time to create a strategy for them. For example, one of my old favorites was a character called Mint. She was a character given out in an old event and isn't really considered to be super good, or at least not at the time that I was still playing. Despite that, she's one of the few characters in the game with the ability to CC large groups of enemies by dragging them to her location, and I found that pretty fun to do when you followed it up with another character that dealt burst damage. Was that the most optimal way to play the game? No, but it was certainly fun when I did it, and it still cleared stages. That's just one example, but stuff like that is prevalent across the game. If you want to use an old unit, there's almost nothing stopping you from doing so, even in endgame modes. I'd actually frequently bring my favorites to the endgame because assuming you developed the right strategy for it, there'd be a way to clear with them while getting all of the rewards. That's not to say that there aren't characters that are better than others, and as you push further into the super difficult endgame stages that don't offer any rewards, you'll probably have to conform more to what's considered meta, but all of that is optional, which brings me to another important thing the game has: the ability to play at your own pace. Most things in the game lack the aspects of FOMO that are prevalent in most other gachas. You can do the story whenever you want, because the only real unlocks from it are the materials that you might need to upgrade your characters. But if you don't want to do the story for those unlocks, the events that frequently run have stages to farm materials in them as well. Even new materials that were released after the game launch usually get stages in older chapters of the story, so that if you already completed it, you're not forced to spam through the new stuff to get whatever you need for the new characters. Another thing that helps in this game is that the only events that don't end up returning eventually are the collabs the game has had, like Monster Hunter, Rainbow Six Siege, or the one that recently just started with Dungeon Meshi. Though that's more due to licensing than anything, so some like the Rainbow Six collab not only had a rerun, but a second collab as well. All of the other events will always come back and then become permanent content after they do. And the important thing to note with that is that clearing the permanent version of them not only lets you obtain the gacha currency you get for clearing the stages for the first time, but also the free welfare units that the events may have offered, like Mint that I mentioned earlier. This is also really helpful because there are some events that are tied to the story. If you're not caught up when an event runs and you don't understand the context of it lore-wise, it'll always be there as a permanent event that you can come back to later. In the meantime, there's this crazy little button up in the top right that you can press to skip story, and you even get a summary as to what's happening if that matters to you. Something else that's really nice to note here on the topic of FOMO, and also the character stuff that I talked about earlier, is that units in this game that are higher rarity will almost always have a lower rarity counterpart that can act as a substitute. If you want a Fortress Defender to act as your artillery but you don't have Horn, the 6-star, well, you can get Ashlock or Fire Whistle as the 5-star options. Don't have Scylla, the 6-star flag bearer that prints DP? Well, you've got Elysium, the 5-star, or Myrtle, the 4-star, that are actually better in some cases. Want a sniper to specifically take out drones that can't be targeted by your melee units? Well, the 2-star operator Ranger can actually be used for that in quite a few non-endgame stages. The amount of options available is kinda staggering, and sure, that's partially due to them having over 300 units in the game, but I can only consider that flexibility to be a good thing, because it makes the gacha part of the game significantly less predatory. When you have a viable alternative to the highest rarity unit, then you're less incentivized to go and spend your currency specifically to get that higher rarity one. On top of that, not only do you get a pretty sizable amount of gacha currency just for playing the game, but it's also farmable. The rates for getting the highest rarity units are solid at around 2% with a soft pity of 50, and every roll you do gives you certificates that you can use to directly buy 5 and 6-star units in a shop. This, coupled with the fact that Arknights only releases 3 to 4 limited characters a year with the rest going into the standard pool, means that you can invest into characters you want rather than the characters that you may need. This is even further exemplified by the dupes of characters not actually being that important. There's a few rare exceptions, but for the most part, it's just a one and done situation. All you've got to do is get the character once, and then you're good for the long term. So, I've just spent the last bit of time glazing the game, and all seems good, so why is the title of the video I stopped playing? First, let me give you some context about myself and also my experience with the game. I'm both a goal-oriented and also pretty competitive guy. Something that I really enjoy in games is when I'm given the opportunity to reach for something really high up. In something like an FPS game, that'd be getting a high rank like hitting GM in Overwatch or Immortal in Valorant. In a story-focused game, it'd probably be something along the lines of getting all the collectibles or the achievements, and in a game that's more focused on grinding like say Monster Hunter, it'd be beating the hardest monsters and getting a perfect build for my character. All of those things are in games that aren't really constantly being updated in the same way a gacha game is, but something that I found interesting with Arknights is that it offered those same types of goals and achievements to reach for. So when I started playing the game, I kind of felt that I fit right in with the types of games that I enjoyed. I played Arknights from its global launch back in early 2020 all the way until late September of 2023, so a bit over 3.5 years. During that period, I cleared all of the available story on both the easy and hard difficulties, every event released in full, had every character in the game, cleared the endgame at the highest difficulty possible, and furthermore went past what was required in that endgame to get all the rewards by picking all of the extra difficulty modifiers that they gave you. The events in endgame are where I felt those goals really shined. I'll talk about the events first as they're a bit simpler. Events in Arknights are usually story driven, and as you go through them there will usually be a bit of trouble that the event characters run into that results in a bunch of combat stages. Once you finish the story mode version of those combat stages, about a week later you get to take a break from farming those event stages because there will be a second set of stages released that are harder to complete and that have a hard mode difficulty tier on top of that. Sometimes these difficulty tiers come with enemy lineup changes, sometimes they come with extra modifiers, and sometimes those changes the maps too. On paper, it's just an increase in difficulty, but the part that I found super interesting was going for the event achievements to get an even higher level of difficulty. See, every event had a set of achievements to complete called medals. Only by doing very specific things could you get all them, and on top of that, a few of the medals had even more specific conditions that you needed to fulfill to do what was called trimming the medal. For example, some stages gave you things on the map that aid you in clearing the stage. While to obtain the base medal, you're usually limited to using that map aid just a few times, trimming the medal might require you to not use it at all, adding an extra layer of difficulty to clearing the stage and also something to shoot for if you wanted an extra bit of challenge. After all, the medals were just a cosmetic badge that you could put on your profile page. It doesn't actually give you anything otherwise. For me, this gave each and every event a purpose, apart from the story of course, as there was always something to chase after getting past those base stages. It ended up being something that I considered pretty fun and was also part of the reason that I kept playing the game for so long. Now for the endgame mode. The main endgame at the time that I was still playing was something called Contingency Contract. The way this worked is that there was a permanent stage that lasted the duration of the event with a daily rotation of stages that were separate from it, and for both of these types there were modifiers you could choose to make it easier or more difficult, with the goal being to clear it at a specific difficulty threshold based on the modifiers you chose. These modifiers were called risks, and each one had a point value attached to it, with more points being given depending on the difficulty of it. A 1-point risk might simply give the enemy some extra defense, whereas a 3-point risk might add a unique mechanic to an enemy. To claim all the rewards, for daily stages you had to reach risk 8. For the permanent stage you had to reach risk 18, but just because the reward stopped at 18 didn't mean you couldn't go higher. If you wanted, you could actually pick every single risk available, which sometimes let the risk count go all the way up to the 30s. If you didn't really get the idea from what I was saying earlier about my competitiveness, that's what I set my goal to be. It definitely took a while. Like, I didn't go out of the gate on the very first contingency contract clearing it at the highest difficulty, but I did end up doing it eventually. First, I just cleared at risk 18. Then I had to jump to the mid-20s, then the high 20s, and finally all the way up to the max risk for that CC at risk 33. I reached my goal, and then from then on my goal was to maintain it. While I didn't necessarily max risk every single CC afterwards, I did always go well above and beyond the basic risk 18 each time that mode ran, all the way to the very last one before they closed the mode for a while to introduce a new endgame, and that meant that I got every single trimmed medal for those CCs. Once that mode ended, I kinda felt a bit lost in the game. I was basically like, now what? But after spending some time trying to figure that out, I kinda just stepped back and thought, well, I've kinda just done everything I wanted to do. I realized that for lack of a better word, I actually felt content with what I'd achieved in the game. This was a game that I poured hundreds, if not over 1,000 hours into across the time I'd been playing it. I fully cleared and very much enjoyed all the story that was available at the time. I cleared every event that came my way. I had tons upon tons of max characters. I cleared every endgame that was released and furthermore did so at the highest difficulty you possibly could. I realized that I didn't actually want anything more because, honestly, I just didn't need it at that point. It really felt like that moment of peace you get after finishing a banger story where you kind of just sit there and absorb what happened and how you feel about it. It kind of just clicked in my head that this game that I'd been playing for over 3 years at this point was just that, a game. It didn't feel like a gacha that I eventually got burned by. It didn't feel like a live service game where I was always waiting for the next update to come so I had content to do because there was so much of it, all available for me to do whenever I wanted. It felt like I was rewarded for the time that I put into it just like a non-gacha game would do. The payoff was there in every way possible, and as a result, it just felt like a genuinely full and complete experience. And I mean, sure, that's not to say there weren't more events and stories and stages to do that came after I quit, but it just didn't feel necessary to me at that point because I felt content, and it was honestly a pretty cool feeling to have when compared to other gachas that just don't offer that same feeling to their players. I didn't quit Arknights because of bad gacha rolls or because I got bored with it or even because I had some bad experiences with the company running it. I quit because I realized that the experience I had with the game was one that I actually felt happy with, and it was also one that I felt comfortable moving on from because in my eyes, I completed the game. Like, I smashed every single goal and achievement that I set out to do, even beyond what the game itself gave me. All of this is why Arknights is the best gacha game that I've ever played. It's the best because it's not a gacha game. It's something more, and it's something special that I think everyone should play at some point. This is something that actually has me extremely excited for their next game, Arknights Enfield. If they were able to create an experience like this once, I have faith that they can do it again. I really do hope that they take the good things from the OG Arknights and bring their philosophy for that game over to Enfield as well. If they stick with their vision and direction in the same way that they did for the OG Arknights, that game is going to be a huge hit despite its focus on factory building, and personally, I can't wait for a wider audience to be able to see what the devs for this game can really do. Anyway, this video spawned from some questions I've gotten a few times in Discord and also on stream, which are what's your favorite gacha game and why'd you quit it? So I thought it'd be a pretty interesting discussion for a video. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. So with that, I'll leave a question for you guys. Have you played Arknights before? And whether or not you have, do you plan on giving Enfield a try? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below or join my Discord link in the description to talk with me about it. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching, subscribe, and if you haven't already, maybe give my other videos a shot too.